The waitress froze when she saw who was sitting in the courtroom, and suddenly the land everyone was fighting over no longer seemed like the biggest secret. A folded Bible slipped from Ivy's hands and hit the wooden floor with a sharp crack. Across the crowded courtroom, an old man pushed through the doorway carrying a weathered leather case. Outside, wagon wheels rattled over melting snow, but inside no one moved. Gideon Blackwell's face had gone pale. Cole Maddox stood near the back wall, his jaw tight, watching Ivy stare at the stranger she thought she'd never see again. Then the old man opened the case. If you're already wondering what's inside, stay with us and subscribe for more unforgettable Wild West love stories. Winter settled over Red Rock Crossing, like a stubborn old ranch hand who had no intention of leaving. The snow along Main Street had turned gray from wagon wheels and horse hooves. Wind slipped between buildings and rattled loose signs above the mercantile and blacksmith shop. Most mornings began the same way. Long before sunrise, a lamp glowed in the kitchen window of Mercer boarding house. Inside, Ivy Walker tied her apron and pushed another split log into the stove. The room smelled of coffee grounds, bacon grease, wet wool, and cold air that slipped in every time the front door opened. She had been awake since 4. By 5, she was carrying kettles. By 6, she was pouring coffee. By 7, the dining room was full. Traveling salesmen, railroad surveyors, cattle buyers, teamsters, men who wanted hot food and a place to sit. Most never looked at her face. More coffee. Another biscuit. Girl, can you clear this? Sometimes they snapped their fingers. Sometimes they slid a few pennies across the table without lifting their eyes. By evening, they would leave town. By morning, they would forget she existed. Ivy moved quietly between tables, not because she lacked confidence, because years of being overlooked had taught her that silence drew less trouble. Near the front window, Edith Mercer stood behind the register checking receipts. The older woman glanced toward Ivy. You haven't sat down once today. Ivy carried a tray toward the kitchen. I'll sit after supper. You said that yesterday, and the day before. Edith shook her head. You work too hard. A small smile appeared on Ivy's face. Somebody has to. Outside, another gust of wind swept snow against the windows. The day passed, then another, then another. Nothing changed. Until one Tuesday morning, the cold had sharpened overnight. Frost covered every corner of the glass. The first customers were just beginning to arrive when the front door opened. A tall man stepped inside. Snow dusted his coat. A worn black hat shadowed his face. Several men near the stove looked up briefly before returning to their coffee. Everyone in town knew him. Cole Maddox, owner of Cedar Bluff Ranch. A man who spoke little and kept mostly to himself. He removed his gloves and sat at an empty table near the window. Ivy approached with a coffee pot. What can I get you, sir? Coffee? Eggs if they're still hot. They are. She returned a few minutes later. The plate landed gently on the table. Anything else? Cole looked up. Actually looked at her, not through her, not around her, at her. No, ma'am. The words were simple. So simple they almost passed unnoticed. Then he added something else. Thank you, Miss Walker. For a moment, Ivy forgot to move. Very few people used her name. Most never bothered learning it. She gave a small nod. You're welcome. Then she walked away. But something felt different. Not larger. Not dramatic. Just different. The next morning, Cole returned. Same table, same coffee, same quiet manner. The morning after that, he came again. By the end of the week, people had started noticing. At the barber shop, at the mercantile, outside the church, people talked. Not loudly, but enough. Funny how often Maddox comes into town lately. Maybe he likes Edith's cooking. Edith's cooking hasn't changed in 20 years. Maybe it ain't the cooking. The rumors reached the boarding house before long. Edith rolled her eyes. Small towns need gossip the way cattle need water. Ivy pretended not to hear. Still, she noticed things. Cole never lingered, never flirted, never searched for excuses to stay. He simply came, ate breakfast, paid, left. Yet every time he handed over the money, he looked directly at her. Every time he thanked her. Every time he used her name. One afternoon she found a loose hinge on the rear kitchen door. The next morning it had been repaired. No note, no explanation. Edith noticed. Funny. What is? That hinge. Ivy examined it. Someone had fixed it properly. Not patched. Fixed. The kind of work done by a person who understood tools. Through the dining room window, she saw Cole mounting his horse across the street. He rode away before she could say anything. Days slipped by. The snow deepened. December settled over Wyoming territory. Then came the night everything changed. The boarding house closed later than usual. A freight wagon had arrived after dark. Extra meals meant extra dishes. By the time Ivy climbed the stairs, carrying her lamp, the building had fallen silent. The hallway creaked beneath her boots. She reached her room, stopped, and frowned. The door wasn't quite shut. She knew she had closed it. Always. Every night. The gap was barely an inch. Enough. Her grip tightened around the lamp. Slowly, she pushed the door open. The room looked wrong. The blanket had been tossed aside. A drawer stood open. Clothes lay scattered across the floor. The chair near the window had been knocked over. Someone had searched the room. Her heartbeat quickened. She crossed the room, looked beneath the bed, checked the drawer, opened the wardrobe. Nothing appeared missing. Not her small savings tin, not her clothes, not her mother's brooch. Nothing. Yet somebody had gone through everything, carefully, deliberately, looking for something specific. The realization settled over her like cold water. This wasn't random. She slowly turned toward the narrow shelf beside her bed. A worn Bible rested exactly where she had left it. For a long moment she stared at it. Then she crossed the room and picked it up. The leather cover felt familiar beneath her fingers. Safe. At least for now. Outside, wind pushed against the window. The lamp flame flickered. Below her, somewhere in the dark boarding house, a floorboard creaked. Ivy stood motionless, holding the Bible against her chest. And for the first time in years, she wondered whether someone had finally discovered what her father had hidden. Ivy barely slept. The wind rattled the boarding house through the night. Every creak of old timber seemed louder than usual. More than once, she sat up in bed and listened. Nothing happened, yet the feeling remained. Someone had been inside her room. Someone had searched through her things, and someone had left empty-handed. Before dawn, she slipped the Bible into a cloth bag and carried it downstairs. The kitchen stove was already warming the room. Edith was rolling biscuit dough. She looked up once. "You look tired. I didn't sleep much." Edith wiped flour from her hands. "Anything happen?" Ivy hesitated. Then she told her. "Not everything. Just enough." The older woman's expression tightened. Maybe it was some drunk traveler. Maybe. But neither woman sounded convinced. The breakfast crowd arrived shortly after sunrise. Coffee cups clinked. Boots stamped snow from the floorboards. Conversations drifted through the dining room. At the usual time, the front door opened. Cole Maddox stepped inside. Snow dusted his shoulders. He removed his gloves and took his seat near the window. When Ivy brought his coffee, he noticed immediately. "You look worried." The word surprised her. Most people never noticed anything. She set down the cup. My room was searched last night. Cole's eyes lifted from the table. Not alarmed. Focused. Was anything taken? No. That seemed to concern him more than if something had been stolen. He glanced toward the staircase, then back at her. Sometimes what isn't taken matters more. The words stayed with her all morning. By afternoon, the sky had darkened again. Fresh snow drifted across Main Street. A delivery wagon backed into the alley behind the boarding house and broke one of the rear steps. The wooden board cracked clean through. Edith muttered under her breath. We'll need someone to fix that before somebody falls. The next morning, Cole arrived carrying a toolbox. No announcement, no explanation, just tools. He spent an hour replacing the broken step. The sound of hammering echoed behind the building. Ivy carried out a mug of coffee. You didn't have to do this. Cole drove another nail into place. Probably did. She stood quietly while he worked. His movements were steady. Careful. Like a man who believed anything worth doing was worth doing correctly. As he finished, his attention shifted toward the cloth bag resting beside the back door. The same bag you carried yesterday. Ivy followed his gaze. Inside rested the Bible. It's old. It means something to you. She looked away. For a long moment, neither spoke. The winter wind swept across the yard. Finally, she said, It belonged to my father. Cole waited. He never seemed to rush people. Never filled silence just to fill it. The quiet made honesty easier. My father worked cattle leases north of here. Cole nodded slightly. I remember hearing his name years ago. He kept records. She looked down at the worn Bible. Before he died, he hid something. The words felt dangerous the moment they left her mouth. Yet somehow she kept going. She told him about the folded documents hidden inside the cover, about the grazing rights, about the thousands of acres nobody had claimed, about the signatures, the seals, the land. When she finished, Cole remained silent. Not because he doubted her, because he was thinking. Finally, he asked one question. Who else knows? No one. The answer came too quickly. Even Ivy heard it. Cole did too. Someone knows enough to search your room. The truth settled heavily between them. A few days later, another piece fell into place. Two cattle buyers sat drinking coffee near the stove. They spoke loudly, the way men often do when they assume nobody important is listening. Gideon Blackwell bought another parcel yesterday. He'll own half the valley soon. He wants everything before the railroad comes through. The second man laughed. He already knows where the tracks are headed. Ivy froze while carrying a tray. Cole heard it too. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. That evening, snow drifted lazily beneath the gas lamps along Main Street. Ivy finished work after dark. The Bible rested inside her bag. She pulled her coat tighter and began walking toward the boarding house after delivering leftovers to the church pantry. The street was nearly empty. Only a few lanterns remained lit. Her boots crunched softly through fresh snow. Then she heard footsteps. Not close. Behind her. She kept walking. The footsteps continued. A little faster now. A knot tightened in her stomach. She turned the corner beside the feed store. The street narrowed. Before she could react, a man stepped from the shadows. His hat was pulled low. His scarf covered most of his face. His eyes went straight to the bag. Hand it over. The words were sharp, urgent, not drunken, not random. The bag, not her money, not her coat. The bag. Ivy gripped the strap tighter. The stranger moved forward. Suddenly, another voice cut through the cold air. That's enough. The man stopped. Cole Maddox stood near the mouth of the alley. one hand resting calmly against a fence rail. No weapon, no threat, just presence. The stranger hesitated, then turned and disappeared into the darkness between two buildings. Within seconds, he was gone. The wind swept through the alley. Silence returned. Cole approached slowly. "Are you hurt?" Ivy shook her head. "No." Her hands trembled slightly. Not from cold. Cole noticed but said nothing. His gaze shifted to the cloth bag, then back to her. The look in his eyes confirmed what both already knew. The break-in had not been random. The search had not been random. And neither had this. Someone was looking for the Bible, and now they knew it for certain. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. Snow clouds hung low over Red Rock Crossing. The wind had shifted during the night, carrying colder air down from the hills west of town. Cole stood outside the boarding house, tightening the strap on his saddle. Ivy stepped onto the porch with a bucket of ashes from the kitchen stove. Neither mentioned the man from the alley right away. Some things felt more real when spoken aloud. Finally, Cole looked toward the sky. "Storm's coming." Ivy followed his gaze. The clouds looked thick enough to bury fence posts. "Bad one?" "Worse than the last." She nodded. Winter in Wyoming had a way of deciding things for people. 3 days later, the storm arrived. By noon, the road north disappeared beneath drifting snow. By evening, the telegraph lines were singing in the wind. Travelers crowded the boarding house. Wagons stopped moving. The town seemed to shrink beneath the white sky. Then came the message. A ranch hand from Cedar Bluff pushed through the front door covered in snow. He found Cole finishing supper. The south barn roofs starting to give way. Cole stood immediately. The ranch hand looked exhausted. "I barely made it through." Edith frowned. "No one's riding back tonight." The young man shook his head. "Mr. Maddox needs to get there now." Cole glanced toward the windows. Snow hammered the glass. Then he looked at Ivy. "You should stay inside." She almost smiled. "As if I was planning to go anywhere." An hour later, he left. The storm swallowed horse and rider within minutes. The next morning, Ivy woke to silence. Not true silence. Storm silence. The kind created when snow buried everything. She looked outside. Nothing remained visible beyond a few yards. The road, the church, the blacksmith shop, gone, white in every direction. By midday, another problem appeared. A section of the boarding house roof began leaking. Buckets appeared in hallways. Guests complained. Edith muttered constantly while moving furniture away from dripping water. Late that afternoon, a ranch wagon appeared through the storm. The driver carried a note. Edith read it, then handed it to Ivy. "Cedar Bluff needs supplies." Cole sent the wagon. Ivy unfolded the paper. The handwriting was simple. Roof holding. Everyone safe. Need flour, coffee, lamp oil. At the bottom was another line. Road may close completely. Travel while it still can. Edith stared out the window. If that road closes, nobody gets through for a week. They loaded supplies quickly. Flour sacks, coffee tins, 2 crates of lamp oil. The driver climbed back onto the wagon, then paused. "Only room left is beside the cargo." Edith looked at Ivy, then toward the leaking ceiling, then back again. "You've been talking about checking the ranch inventory books." Ivy blinked. The excuse sounded thin. Edith ignored that. "And I trust Cole more than I trust this roof." Within 30 minutes, Ivy found herself riding toward Cedar Bluff. The storm worsened before they reached the ranch. Snow struck sideways. Fence lines vanished. More than once, the driver stopped to locate landmarks buried beneath drifts. By the time they passed through the ranch gate, darkness had fallen. Lantern light glowed from the main house. The front door opened. Cole stepped outside. Relief crossed his face so quickly Ivy almost missed it. "You made it." The words came before he seemed aware he had spoken them. The driver unloaded supplies. Wind pushed snow across the porch. Cole reached for the flour sacks. "I've got these." Inside, warmth rushed toward them. The house smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and pine logs drying near the stove. Ivy removed her gloves. Her fingers stung as feeling returned. Cole poured coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. She wrapped both hands around it. "You weren't supposed to come." Neither was the storm. That earned the smallest hint of a smile. For a moment, the room felt unexpectedly comfortable. Outside, the wind howled around the ranch house. Inside, the fire crackled steadily. The next morning revealed the truth. Nobody was leaving. Snow had buried the road. Drifts reached the tops of fence rails. The ranch hands spent hours digging paths between buildings. By afternoon, everyone accepted reality. The storm had trapped them. Days passed. Then more days. Life settled into a rhythm. Ivy helped in the kitchen, fed chickens, sorted inventory receipts, mended torn work shirts beside the stove. Cole repaired harnesses at the table after supper. Sometimes neither spoke for several minutes. The silence never felt uncomfortable. One evening, she carried folded laundry down a hallway she had never explored. A door stood slightly open. Inside sat a room untouched by time. A neatly made bed, a framed photograph, a woman's shawl hanging beside the wardrobe. No dust, no disorder, only absence. Ivy quietly stepped back. Later that night, Cole noticed her glance toward the hallway. "My wife's room." He said it without warning, without drama, just truth. "I keep meaning to change it." He stared into the fire. "But I never do." Ivy nodded. Neither offered comfort. Neither needed to. Some losses were too old for sympathy, yet too important to ignore. Outside, the storm finally began weakening. For the first time in days, moonlight appeared through the clouds. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps at the front door. A messenger stood outside holding a leather case protected beneath his coat. "I've been looking for Miss Walker." The room grew still. The man handed over an envelope. "Official seal. Cheyenne Territorial Court." Ivy opened it slowly. Read once, then again. Her hands lowered. Cole watched her expression change. "What is it?" She handed him the paper. The legal notice stated that Gideon Blackwell had filed a formal claim. According to his petition, the grazing lands belonged to him. A hearing had been scheduled. If Ivy Walker failed to appear in Cheyenne within 3 weeks, her rights could be permanently forfeited. The fire cracked softly. Nobody spoke. Beyond the window, the storm was ending. But something far more dangerous had just begun. The legal notice sat on the kitchen table at Cedar Bluff Ranch long after the messenger had gone. The paper looked ordinary. A few lines of ink, a seal pressed into the corner. Nothing about it seemed powerful, yet it carried enough weight to change a person's future. Cole folded it carefully and handed it back to Ivy. "You'll have to go," she nodded. Neither pretended otherwise. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Snow sparkled across the ranch yard. The world looked clean again. But the peace didn't last. When the roads reopened and Ivy returned to Red Rock Crossing, she noticed the change almost immediately. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. People who once ignored her now watched her. Not kindly, curiously, suspiciously. Word traveled fast in a frontier town. By the end of the week, everyone seemed to know about the disputed land. One morning, a rancher she had served coffee to for years pushed his plate away before she reached the table. "I'll wait for someone else." The words were polite. The meaning wasn't. Ivy simply nodded and carried the coffee pot elsewhere. Edith saw everything. That evening, she slammed a ledger shut. They never cared when you worked yourself sick. Ivy continued drying dishes. They care now, because somebody told them there's money involved. The older woman shook her head. People can be disappointing. The next few days proved her right. Rumors spread through town like smoke. Some claimed Ivy had forged the documents. Others said she had invented the entire story. A few insisted she was using Cole Maddox to gain sympathy. The boarding house began losing customers. Several regulars started eating elsewhere. Receipts grew thinner. The dining room felt emptier. One afternoon, Ivy found Edith studying the account book near the register. The older woman's jaw tightened. We're down nearly 20%. Ivy lowered her eyes. The numbers said what neither wanted to admit. People were choosing sides, and the boarding house was paying the price. That night, she sat alone in her room. The Bible rested on the bed beside her. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the roof outside. A slow, lonely sound. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Edith in the kitchen. I'm leaving for Cheyenne early. Edith looked up sharply. The hearing isn't for another week. I know, huh? The older woman understood immediately. You think this is your fault? Ivy remained silent. Edith crossed the room. You listen to me. She placed a flower-covered hand over Ivy's. You didn't start this. But people are losing business because of me. They're losing their sense before they're losing business. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Edith sighed. You're stubborn. A faint smile touched Ivy's face. So I've been told. News of her departure reached Cole before sunset. He arrived just before closing. Snow dripped from his coat as he entered. The dining room was nearly empty. Only 2 travelers remained near the stove. Cole removed his hat. When are you leaving? Friday. That's 3 days early. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, not questioning, not arguing, just understanding, the kind that hurts more than disagreement. Friday arrived cold and clear. A pale winter sun hung over Red Rock Crossing. Cole waited beside a wagon outside the boarding house. The horses had been brushed. Fresh feed bags hung from the side rails. A bedroll rested in the back. Several parcels sat beneath a canvas cover. Flour, dried apples, coffee, salted beef. Enough supplies for the journey. Ivy stared at everything. You packed all this? Cole adjusted a strap. Most of it. You didn't have to. His answer came quietly. Probably did. For a moment she thought he might offer to come with her. Part of her hoped he would. Another part feared she might accept. But he never said it. Instead, he handed her a small leather pouch. Travel money. Carefully counted. Enough to pay for lodging and meals along the road. She tried to give it back. He refused. The silence between them stretched. The horses shifted impatiently. Somewhere across town, a church bell rang noon. Finally, Ivy looked up. What if I lose? Cole's eyes met hers. Steady. Certain. Not because he knew the future. Because he believed she deserved one. Then you'll still be the same woman who earned every honest thing she ever had. The words stayed with her. Then he added something else. The last thing he would say before she climbed into the wagon. Don't let anybody decide your value for you. The wind moved through the street. Neither looked away. Then the moment passed. Ivy climbed aboard. The wagon rolled forward. She looked back once. Cole stood exactly where she had left him, hat in hand, watching, not calling her back, not asking her to stay, just standing there, trusting her to find her own road. 3 days later, she reached Cheyenne. The territorial capital bustled with wagons, freight teams, lawyers, surveyors, and railroad men. Dust mixed with melting snow in the streets. The hearing was scheduled for the following morning. That evening, Ivy visited the records office to review the filings. A clerk handed her several documents. At first, everything seemed normal. Then she saw the signatures. Her stomach tightened. The deeds Gideon Blackwell had submitted carried seals, witnesses, property descriptions. Every page appeared official. Too official. By nightfall, the second blow arrived. The witnesses who had once worked with her father could not be found. One had supposedly moved west. Another had disappeared from town entirely. A third claimed he remembered nothing. Ivy sat alone in her rented room above a hotel near Capitol Avenue. The lamp burned low. The Bible rested on the table. The papers lay scattered before her. Outside, wagon wheels rattled across frozen streets. Inside, the truth became impossible to ignore. Gideon Blackwell had prepared for this long before she arrived. The forged documents were ready. The witnesses were gone. The hearing was less than 12 hours away, and for the first time since her father died, Ivy realized she might lose everything. She sat at the small desk in her hotel room long after midnight. The lamp flame burned low. Outside, wagon wheels rattled over frozen streets. Somewhere farther down the block, a piano drifted through the walls of a saloon before fading into silence. The Bible remained open in front of her. Beside it lay the original documents her father had hidden years ago. She read them again, then again. The words never changed, but fear had a way of making truth feel fragile. Near dawn, she finally closed her eyes. Sleep came only in pieces. The next morning, Cheyenne was already awake when she reached the courthouse. Men in wool coats crowded the steps. Lawyers carried folders beneath their arms. Railroad representatives moved between offices across the square. Inside, the hearing room smelled of paper, coal smoke, and winter coats drying near the stove. Gideon Blackwell was already there. His beard was neatly trimmed. His suit looked expensive. Confidence sat on him like another layer of clothing. Nathan Blackwell stood beside him. When he saw Ivy enter, he offered a polite smile. It felt colder than the Wyoming wind. The proceedings began. Documents were presented, signatures examined, maps unfolded across tables. For a while it seemed Gideon had prepared for every question. His attorneys spoke smoothly. His witnesses confirmed his version of events. Each answer seemed to strengthen his claim. Ivy sat quietly, listening, waiting. The room grew heavier with every passing minute. Then the judge looked toward her. "Miss Walker, do you have any additional evidence?" For a brief moment she had nothing, only truth. And sometimes truth alone feels terribly small. A murmur spread through the room. Someone near the back opened the door. Cold air swept inside. Heads turned. An elderly man stepped across the threshold carrying a worn leather case. His coat looked 20 years old. Snow clung to his boots, but his eyes were clear. Very clear. "Sorry I'm late." The room fell silent. Ivy stared. She recognized him instantly. Ezra Collins, her father's old friend, former land records clerk, the man nobody had been able to find. Gideon's confidence disappeared for the first time. Ezra approached the table slowly, then opened the leather case. Inside rested several thick record books, original territorial registers, official entries, property transfers, survey filings, every page carefully preserved. The judge adjusted his spectacles. The room listened. Ezra pointed to one entry, then another, and another. One by one, the records exposed the truth. The grazing rights had never belonged to Gideon Blackwell. They had been legally assigned years earlier. The signatures matched. The dates matched. The seals matched. Everything matched. except Gideon's documents. Those did not. The hearing shifted. Suddenly the questions moved in a different direction. Toward Gideon. Toward Nathan. Toward the papers they had submitted. Nathan's face grew pale. The judge pressed harder. So did the attorneys. The room became very quiet. Then Nathan broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Simply exhausted. He lowered his eyes and told the truth. About hiring men to search for documents. About the break-in at the boarding house. About the attempt to steal the Bible. About the forged paperwork. Every word landed like a hammer. Gideon stared at his son in disbelief. Deputy Russell Hayes stepped forward from the back of the room. Ivy hadn't even noticed him arrive. The deputy removed his hat, looked at the judge, then at Gideon. The warrant was signed within minutes. The room erupted into whispers. By afternoon, it was over. The land belonged to Ivy. The claims were dismissed. The Blackwells were finished. For weeks, she had imagined this moment. Victory, relief, celebration. Instead, she felt strangely empty. As she left the courthouse, people stopped her. The same people who had doubted her. The same people who had listened to rumors. Now they smiled. Now they offered congratulations. Now they wanted introductions, advice, friendship. Ivy thanked them politely, but something inside her had already changed. By evening, she sat alone in her hotel room. The documents were safe. The future was secure. Yet the room felt colder than Cedar Bluff had ever felt. She opened her travel bag to begin packing. That was when she found the envelope, folded between two shirts, her name written across the front. The handwriting belonged to Cole. Slowly, she opened it. The letter was short, just a few lines. No promises, no grand declarations, no requests, only honesty. If you build a life somewhere else, I hope it's a good one. But if there's ever a day you need a place to return to, the door at Cedar Bluff will always be open. Cole. Ivy read the letter twice, then a third time. By the time she lowered it, she was smiling through tears she hadn't realized were there. For the first time since arriving in Cheyenne, she knew exactly what she wanted. 3 weeks later, spring touched Wyoming. Snow retreated from the valleys. Small patches of green returned to the hills. The road to Red Rock Crossing no longer disappeared beneath drifts. A wagon rolled west beneath a wide blue sky. Inside sat Ivy Walker, not a waitress carrying trays, not an heir protecting documents, just Ivy. Near sunset, Cedar Bluff Ranch appeared beyond the rise. The familiar gate, the barn, the windmill turning slowly above the well, and one man repairing a fence line near the pasture. Cole Maddox. He straightened when he heard the wagon. For a second, he simply watched, as though afraid the image might vanish. Ivy stepped down. The spring breeze moved through the grass around her boots. Neither spoke immediately. The distance between them suddenly seemed very important, then very small. Cole removed his gloves. "You made it back." "I did." He glanced toward the wagon. "I wasn't sure." "I wasn't either." A faint smile touched his face, the kind that appeared rarely and never stayed long. They began walking through the pasture together. The sun lowered behind the hills. Birds crossed the sky overhead. Everything felt quieter than before. At the edge of the field, Ivy stopped. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the letter, and handed it back. Cole looked confused. Then she spoke. "I think I finally found where I belong." The wind moved softly through the grass. For several seconds he said nothing. Then his hand disappeared into his jacket pocket. When it returned, a small ring rested in his palm. Simple, plain gold, well worn from being carried for months. His eyes met hers. Steady as ever. I never planned to use this unless you came back on your own. The sun painted the valley gold. Cole took a breath, then knelt. Not because she needed saving, not because he wanted to claim her, but because some things deserve to be asked. Ivy Walker, would you build a home with me? The world seemed to pause. The breeze, the birds, the fading sunlight, everything. Then Ivy smiled, the kind of smile that begins quietly and reaches all the way to the eyes. Yes. No church bells rang. No crowd gathered. No speeches followed. Only open land. A Wyoming sunset. And two people standing together beneath a sky that suddenly felt endless. Months earlier, she had been a waitress earning pennies while strangers forgot her name. People thought the land would become her greatest reward. They were wrong. The land was only property. What she found was far more valuable. A man who had seen her worth long before anyone knew she owned anything at all. As the last light faded across Cedar Bluff Ranch, Ivy slipped her hand into Cole's, and together they walked toward the house, toward the warmth in the windows, toward the life waiting inside, toward home. And maybe that's what stayed with me long after Ivy and Cole disappeared into that Wyoming sunset. Not the land, not the court victory, not even the ring. It was the simple truth that sometimes the thing we spend years searching for isn't a place at all. It's the person who sees us clearly when the rest of the world looks away. Imagine standing where Ivy once stood. Imagine working day after day, feeling invisible, carrying burdens nobody else can see. Then imagine meeting someone who doesn't try to change you, rescue you, or own your future. Someone who simply recognizes your worth before there is anything to gain from it. I think that's why this story feels so human. Life has a way of leaving scars that don't show on the outside. Disappointment, loss, loneliness. The quiet fear that maybe we don't matter as much as we hoped. But healing often begins in the smallest moments. A kind word, an open door, a hand that stays steady when everything else feels uncertain. Perhaps the real gift in this story wasn't the inheritance. It was learning that dignity cannot be taken, and that love grows strongest where respect comes first. If you've ever found your way back to someone, or if you're still hoping to, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if these old Western tales of courage, healing, and unexpected love feel a little like coming home, I hope you'll stay a while. There are many more stories waiting just beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you.